In the unforgiving heat of the Mojave, a former Echo Dust operative defies protocol to save a dying child, sparking a covert revival of a legendary rescue unit once thought forgotten. What begins as a desperate run across hostile territory becomes the foundation of the Ghost Line, a network of veterans, medics, and rogue pilots who serve without glory, but with unshakable purpose. As forgotten soldiers are rescued and lives are saved, a legacy once buried in sand rises again, carried by those who still walk. Welcome to my channel. They say the Mojave doesn't forgive mistakes, that it watches, waits, and when it finally speaks, it's in the voice of thunder or the distant roar of jet engines. That day, it was both. I was halfway through what should have been a 4-hour medical run when I saw them. 2 black specks cutting across the cobalt sky like angry wasps. A pair of A-10 Thunderhawks. Pilots call them bull riders. Grunts like me used to call them angels and demons, depending on which side of the barrel you were on. The engine of my beat-up Tacoma growled as I crested a dune outside Ridgeway Flats. Dust curled around the wheels like smoke. In the back seat, a 6-year-old boy lay curled up on a bed of blankets. His forehead was slick with sweat, and his breathing had turned shallow. We'd been trying to reach the mobile Red Cross post across the California-Nevada border, but every mile was a gamble. Too many patrols, too few signs of mercy. Then the radio crackled. Static first, then a clipped male voice. Unidentified ground vehicle. You are entering restricted territory. Halt immediately for inspection. I glanced at the rearview mirror, not to look for them, but to check the boy again. His mother sat beside him, wide-eyed and silent. She spoke only Spanish, but fear needs no translation. Her eyes said everything. He doesn't have time for protocol. I picked up the handset. This is a civilian medical evac transport en route to the Crossfield Clinic. Critical patient on board. I'm not stopping. The response came sharp and immediate. Negative. No civilian clearance filed. Prepare for inspection or face engagement. And just like that, I knew. Command had flagged us. They thought we were smugglers. Or worse, insurgents. All because I didn't go through the official request channels. Like I had time to wait for a desk jockey in Sacramento to rubber stamp a form while this boy slipped away in the back seat. I floored it. The truck bucked and roared. I kept both hands on the wheel, eyes fixed on the endless line of road ahead. My thumb tapped the Desert Med badge stitched onto my vest. Old habit. Beneath it, the patch I never removed. A sun-bleached skull and wings, the insignia of Echo Dust Unit. Most wouldn't recognize it. Most shouldn't. We weren't built for recognition. We were the ghosts of Forward Operating Zone Echo, tasked with search and rescue under desert fire. That patch had once marked me as a sergeant of Echo Dust. Now it marked me for something else. Respect, fear, or maybe both. The radio barked again. Final warning. Comply, or you will be intercepted. I didn't reply. I didn't have to, because I could already hear the sound. Low, thrumming, unmistakable. Like a hive of bees trapped in a steel drum. The Thunderhawks were descending. Their shadows crawled across the desert floor like vultures circling a carcass. And still I drove. Because there was no other option. The radio had gone quiet. But silence never meant peace out here. It meant the next move would come fast, and without warning. I saw the first jet bank low over the ridge, cutting a wide arc like a hawk hunting vermin. The second followed close behind, its wings shimmering in the desert heat. They weren't here to scare me anymore. They were here to end whatever they thought I was. That's when I made a decision, one I hadn't made in years. I reached under the seat and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was an old military-issue radio transponder, one I wasn't supposed to have. One that hadn't broadcast a signal since I left Echo Dust 6 years ago. But I kept it functional, part superstition, part stubbornness. I flipped the switch and spoke into the mic. Echo Dust, 17, override channel Charlie 9er. Medical emergency transport under duress. Request temporary hold on air engagement. Identification code, Sierra Zulu 94. I didn't know if anyone still monitored the frequency, or if anyone still remembered what Sierra Zulu 94 meant. But I spoke it anyway, like a prayer shouted into a storm. And maybe prayers still held power, because the jets didn't fire. Instead, the lead fighter made another pass, closer this time. Dust exploded around the Tacoma as its engines howled over us. The shock wave rattled the windows, but I kept the truck straight. My hands had steadied a wheel while dragging wounded out of war zones before. I wasn't about to lose my nerve now. The child coughed behind me, a small sound, but sharp as a rifle crack in my chest. I checked the mirror. His skin had gone paler. The fever was winning. That's when something shifted. The lead jet banked again, but this time slower, more deliberate. I caught a glimpse of the pilot through the canopy, just a flicker. His head tilted, eyes scanning me through whatever fancy optics they used up there. Then it happened. The A-10 pulled up beside me, hovering just high enough not to flatten the truck with its wash. He was flying parallel now. Not hostile, not aggressive, observing. And I knew exactly why. He'd seen the patch. That sun-bleached symbol on my shoulder, still visible through the dust-crusted window. The skull with wings. The desert silhouette. There was no mistaking it for anyone who'd served in joint ops or heard the stories whispered in the chow halls of outposts that didn't officially exist. I reached for the radio again. You see it, don't you? There was a pause. Then, finally, a voice came back, lower, softer than before. Echoed dust. I exhaled. What's left of her? Static buzzed. Then the second pilot's voice broke through. Holy, that's Ghost Rider. Ma'am, we read you. Holding engagement. Ghost Rider. That was my call sign. A relic from another life. One I'd left behind with my discharge papers and scarred-up memories. Now it was back. And I had exactly 18 minutes to get this boy across the border before his lungs stopped working. Recognition bought me time. But not enough. Captain, I said into the mic, you want to honor that patch? Then help me get this boy to the clinic. We don't make it in time, he dies. There was another pause. A longer one. Then, copy that. Bull Rider's on escort. Let's get him home. The landscape began to blur. The Tacoma's tires chewed through dry creek beds and gravel cuts like it knew the urgency. My eyes flicked between the GPS, still glitching from the last drop in signal, and the boy. His chest was rising too fast. Shallow breaths. His skin had taken on that waxy sheen I'd seen too many times in combat medics' tents. We had 13 minutes to make the border post near El Centro. The two A-10s, call signs Bull Rider 1 and 2, dropped elevation and took positions on either side of me. It felt surreal, like a moment plucked out of a movie. My battered truck, flanked by multi-million-dollar aircraft, kicking up parallel storms of sand as we barreled toward salvation. It wasn't about the show. Not for me. Not for them now. They were flying cover. This is Bull Rider lead, the captain called. We're clearing path. Patch me into border patrol. We'll get you a straight shot. I heard the transmission shift frequencies. Static popped, followed by a clipped voice from the El Centro outpost. Who the hell is requesting unauthorized corridor access? Rodriguez. That was the captain's name. I remembered now. Answered like a man who'd grown 10 years older in the last 10 minutes. This is Captain Rodriguez, USAF. Escorting medical emergency evac, priority Echo. Civilian vehicle driven by Echo Dust veteran. Patch confirmed. There was a pause on the other end. A long one. Then, Jesus, okay. We read you. Corridor access granted. Redirecting drones and recon units. Keep it tight. Back in the truck, the boy let out a wheeze so thin it barely reached his lips. His mother had started whispering something. Prayer, maybe, or the only lullaby she could remember. Her eyes never left my rearview mirror. I reached into the glove box, yanked out a half-empty bottle of electrolyte fluid, and tossed it back to her. Tiny sips, I said. Don't let him gulp. She nodded, holding the bottle like it was spun gold. Ahead of me, the border checkpoint emerged, a low concrete building surrounded by tall fencing and sun-baked dirt. A convoy of military jeeps had already pulled to the side. Someone had cleared a path straight through, but getting there would still take time. And we didn't have much. Rodriguez came back on the comm. We'll go ahead. Signal them to be ready. Hold your speed. You're almost there, Ghost Rider. I hadn't heard anyone call me that in 6 years. Funny thing was, I didn't hate it now. Not today. Maybe because, for the first time in a long while, it felt like it meant something again. The second A-10, Bull Rider 2, dropped even lower and buzzed the border station, making every soldier on the ground whip around and raise weapons instinctively. But then they saw the markings, the escort pattern. They understood. They lowered their guns and began waving us in. I had 6 minutes to cover the last 2 miles. And a child's life to save. The last stretch was hell, flat desert broken only by the blur of fencing and radio towers. The heat had thickened, turning the air syrupy. The Tacoma was shaking now, The old shock's not built for this kind of sustained abuse. But I didn't dare slow down. Rodriguez came back over the comms. Medical team standing by. Crossing Zone Charlie 2. You've got 3 minutes. I'll clear the outer corridor. I could see it now, a line of flashing lights, soldiers forming a tight perimeter around the checkpoint. A helicopter idled nearby, blades spinning, ready to lift out if needed. Then came the sound I didn't expect. Silence. No engine noise. No comm chatter. Just a sudden, complete stillness as the A-10s peeled off to either side and rose into holding patterns. And that's when I noticed them. The people. Soldiers. Medics. Officials. Lined up just beyond the checkpoint. Standing in 2 straight rows like a silent corridor of reverence. Their weapons were holstered. Their helmets tucked under their arms. Eyes forward. Waiting. And at the center of it all, an older man in a white uniform stepped forward. Silver oak leaves gleamed on his collar. A colonel, not some paper pusher. He raised one hand. Not in command, but in acknowledgement. As I rolled through the checkpoint, the crowd didn't move. They didn't cheer or salute. They simply stood in silence. I pulled to a stop just beyond the line. Immediately, medics rushed in. One of them opened the rear door and gently lifted the boy out, already checking vitals, barking updates I didn't have to interpret. They knew. His mother followed, but before she disappeared with the team, she looked back at me. No words. Just that same exhausted gratitude I'd seen in the eyes of rescued soldiers during missions we were never allowed to talk about. That was enough. Then Colonel Walker approached my window. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp. "Sergeant Lane," he said, reading from the info fed to him. "Echo Dust. I served with your CO back in Basra." I nodded once. "Then you know we don't stop for red tape." He smiled faintly. "I know. And if I may say so, that was one hell of a run." I reached across the seat, plucked the patch off my shoulder, the one I hadn't removed in 6 years, and handed it to him. Sometimes legends need to get a little dirty again. He looked down at the patch, the old insignia worn almost to the thread, and held it like something sacred. "I'll make sure they remember this," he said. "No need," I replied, starting the engine. The boy's breathing. That's all I came for. As I pulled away from the border station and the watching crowd, the A-10s roared overhead one last time, forming a protective arc above the desert. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't running from something. I was running towards something. I didn't sleep that night. Not from adrenaline. That burned off hours ago. It was something quieter, heavier. The kind of tired that comes when your body shuts down, but your soul won't let you. I parked the truck behind the clinic outpost and sat there for a long while, watching the sun edge over the horizon like it was too tired to rise. Somewhere inside, that boy was being stabilized. Tubes. Fluids. Machines that beep. I didn't need to see it. I'd lived it before. I just needed to know he had a fighting chance. That was enough for now. Around 0600, I stepped inside. The nurses knew who I was. Word travels fast when 2 A-10s follow a civilian truck across restricted airspace. One of them, young, freckles, green scrubs, handed me a cup of black coffee without asking. "He's stable," she said. "Fever broke an hour ago." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "He asked for you," she added. I followed her to a dimly lit recovery room. The boy was curled under a thermal blanket, for in his arm, oxygen tube running beneath his nose. His mom sat beside him, half asleep, still holding his hand. When he opened his eyes, I saw something unexpected. A smile. Small. Crooked. But real. He whispered something in Spanish I couldn't catch. His mother translated. "He says you drive faster than anyone he's ever met." I chuckled. "Tell him he hasn't seen me in reverse." Then I gave them their moment and slipped out. I never stuck around too long. People remember you differently when you leave before the story ends. But my timing wasn't good enough this time. Colonel Walker was waiting for me outside the clinic, leaning against a sand-dusted Humvee. "You left without saying goodbye," he said. "Didn't realize I needed permission," I replied. He smiled faintly. "Permission's the one thing you clearly don't need, Sergeant." He handed me something, a worn folder, thick with documents, some redacted, some not. "After yesterday, I did some digging. Your file should have been archived. Buried deep. But it's not. Command's been keeping an eye on Echo Dust vets. Especially you." I opened the folder. Inside was a recommendation, signed, stamped, and endorsed by 3 separate military branches. They wanted me back. Not as a soldier. As a field survival consultant. I'm not interested, I said. I did my time. I have my mission. Walker nodded. Then let us support your mission. I raised an eyebrow. We've started a joint outreach initiative. Civilian medical with military escort clearance. Think of it as the unofficial continuation of Echo Dust. We'll fund your runs. You choose the route, the patient, the pace. But this time, you don't go alone. I looked at him for a long time. I could feel the desert humming beneath my boots. The silence of old ghosts whispering in the back of my mind. You think I'm a hero? I asked. He shook his head. No, I think you're a survivor. And survivors like you teach the rest of us how to do better. I didn't say yes. But I didn't walk away either. And that was enough for now. The next few weeks changed everything. My once solitary runs through dead desert roads became coordinated missions. Colonel Walker kept his promise. No red tape, no reporters, just quiet support where it counted. Fuel cards. Updated comms gear. Medical-grade kits. Even a radio patch into regional air traffic if I needed it. They called it the Sandline Program. I called it borrowed time. And the thing that stunned me most? The A-10 pilots. Rodriguez and his wingman, Duke, they didn't vanish after the escort. They kept checking in. Route recon, they called it. But it was more than that. The first time I returned to base after a supply drop to a refugee pocket outside Gila Springs, 2 A-10s had flown low overhead, just once. No escort. No transmission. Just a silent pass over my truck. A salute from the sky. It didn't end there. One morning, I found Rodriguez leaning against the front bumper of my truck, sipping from a thermos like he'd been waiting all morning. I brought you a gift, he said. He opened a duffel bag and pulled out a drone, not military grade, but still better than anything I could afford. Recon Bird. 4K optics. Thermal ready. Thought you could use an eye in the sky. I blinked. Why? Rodriguez scratched the back of his neck. Because. I owe my life to someone like you. You saved that boy. But 10 years ago, someone like you saved my old man in Kandahar. Name was Sergeant Layla Torres. Wore the same patch. I froze. Layla Torres. Echo Dust Unit. My mentor. My shadow during ops. She'd gone MIA in 2014. Never recovered. I nodded slowly. She taught me everything. Rodriguez smiled, eyes glassy. Then this, everything we're doing, it's her legacy too. After that, the support grew. Pilots rotated in on their leave days just to run drills with me, map reading, comm sync, even nighttime evacs. Not one of them treated me like a civilian. They called me ma'am and followed orders like I still wore a stripe. But I hadn't worn rank in 6 years. And maybe that was the point. The uniform might have come off, but the mission never did. We started calling ourselves Ghost Line, an unofficial net. Vets, medics, forward operators, civilian rescuers. The kind of people who ran toward the trouble most turned away from. Nobody wrote about us. Nobody awarded us medals. But the sick got moved. The wounded got help. The forgotten got found. And every now and then, I'd glance at the patched spot on my shoulder, where the old Echo Dust insignia used to sit, and feel the phantom weight of it still there. Because some ghosts don't haunt battlefields. They drive pickup trucks through dust storms and keep promises no one else remembers. You don't think about legacy much when you're patching up wounds in the back of a truck or driving 12 hours straight through a sandstorm with a kid wheezing in the backseat. You just move forward, mile by mile, because stopping means losing. But legacy, it has a way of catching up with you. It started with a letter. Folded twice, sealed in a plain envelope, left under my windshield wiper at the Southern Depot in Needles. No return address. No insignia. Just 3 words written in block print across the top. You found me. Inside, it was a photograph. Black and white. Faded at the edges. It showed 2 soldiers. One was me, the other was Layla Torres. It was taken after the Pullman Ridge rescue, when we carried 2 wounded scouts across the desert in 123-degree heat. I hadn't seen that photo since the day it was developed. I thought it was lost. But that wasn't what shook me. Scrawled on the back, in Layla's unmistakable cursive, were the words. We never leave our own. You taught me that. I stood there a long time, holding that photograph, listening to the wind blow sand across the lot. I knew someone had sent it on purpose. Someone who knew we weren't just running old missions. We were keeping something alive. Later that night, I spoke with Walker. He didn't know where the photo had come from, but he looked just as haunted holding it. Maybe this ghost line thing isn't just about rescue, he said. Maybe it's about remembering the people who never got to come home. I kept the photo in my glove box after that. Every run, every mile. It reminded me why I was still out here. The missions didn't slow down. In fact, they increased. Requests started coming in from deep in the Badlands, places even drones wouldn't scout. People out there didn't trust systems. They trusted boots in the dirt. And word had spread. There was a woman with no uniform, no orders, but if you were dying and lost, she'd find you. They called me the ghost driver. I never asked for the name, but I didn't fight it either. Then one day, Rodriguez called in on a private channel. "Ma'am," he said, voice tight. "We've got a situation. Dust storm swallowed a convoy, Sector 9, 60 miles east of Bluff Springs. 3 vehicles, 2 wounded, 1 child with asthma. Visibility is 0. Who's out there?" I asked. "National Guard and a schoolteacher from the refugee corridor. They didn't file clearance, tried to make it to a safer sector before nightfall." I didn't wait for the rest. I grabbed my bag, topped off the tank, and rolled out into the orange wall of sand. It took every trick I'd ever learned. Reading the wind, listening to the hum in the tires, watching how the grit formed rivers across the ground. GPS was useless. Comms were intermittent. But instinct, that old combat instinct, never left. 2 hours later, I found them. They were huddled in the last working truck, wrapped in tarps, coughing and half-blind. The teacher, maybe 30, eyes like granite, had kept the kid breathing with nothing but a bottle of water and an old inhaler. We got them out. We all made it back. And when we did, Rodriguez met me at the edge of the landing zone and handed me something. A new patch. Same skull. Same wings. But this time, the words were different. Echo line, we still walk. And underneath it, Ghost Rider, first of many. The patch sat on my desk for 3 days before I touched it again. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the finality of it, the way it seemed to fold everything I had been into something bigger, something others could carry. I'd never cared about names or recognition, but I understood the weight of a symbol. That patch meant the missions didn't die with me. They multiplied. Word traveled faster than I could track. Pilots started requesting assignments in desert corridors they used to avoid. Medics from old units reached out, asking how they could volunteer off the record. Even civilian truckers started tagging their mirrors with tiny decals, skulls with wings, cut from scraps of duct tape and marker. The ghost line was growing. And then came the oath. I didn't write it. It came from an 18-year-old Air Force mechanic named June Whitaker, who had never set foot in a combat zone, but had watched me drag a shrapnel-torn teenager out of a collapsed adobe hut during a monsoon run. She posted it to a secure forum. A few lines. "No ceremony. We don't walk for medals. We walk for lives. We don't wait for clearance. We move when others freeze. No ghost walks alone. No desert is empty when the mission is real." She titled it, The Sandline Oath. By the end of the week, I saw it stenciled on the side of a med drone outside Needles, then spray-painted onto a shipping crate, then tattooed on the forearm of a young sergeant I'd never met before, who nodded at me silently as I passed through an old airfield. Everywhere I turned, the line between past and present blurred, between duty and defiance, between regulation and instinct. Walker reached out again. "HQ's aware," he said quietly. "They're not trying to shut it down. Not yet." "Because it works?" I asked. "Because it reminds them what used to matter." But the silence didn't last. 2 months after that first escort mission, I got word that changed everything. A communications drone picked up a faint signal buried in desert static. Morse code, an old SOS variant used only by Echo Dust back in the blackout years. It had bounced off 3 retired repeater towers and 1 weather balloon, likely launched manually. The message repeated 3 times before it cut off. Echo Dust Outpost Kilo 5. Hostile terrain. No extraction. Too alive. Request help. Dust doesn't abandon dust. That was the old field code for one thing. A unit was still out there. 2 people. Alive. Waiting. And somehow, impossibly, still using our protocols. I stared at the signal printout until the letters blurred. Rodriguez was the first to speak. "What's the move, Ghost Rider?" I looked at him, then at the patch on my desk. And I knew. We're going to bring them home. It took 4 days to prep. Walker pulled every satellite and recon archive he could find on the coordinates embedded in that old Echo Dust distress signal. The location was brutal, Badlands north of the Sierra Nevada shelf, where dust storms met tectonic fractures and the wind didn't just howl. it screamed. Kilo 5. That outpost was scrubbed from official records in 2015, decommissioned after a mining collapse rendered the region unstable for long-term military infrastructure. But some of us always suspected Echo Dust teams had been stationed there during blackout runs. It made sense. The kind of places people pretend don't exist, that's where they sent us. I'd led rescues in hostile territory, under fire, low on food and hope. But this was different, because it meant someone had stayed behind when the world moved on. Someone who still believed the dust wouldn't abandon its own. I pulled in every favor we had. Rodriguez got clearance for 4 air support runs, though he warned they'd have to fly high. Wind shear near Kilo 5 was lethal. June Whitaker retrofitted one of our TAC rovers with dual exhaust filtration and a backup O2 system. Even Walker himself geared up an old desert camo, just in case. But I was going in alone. That was always the deal. One vehicle, one mission. In and out. The drive was 200 miles through shifting terrain, half of it unmarked. The sky looked like bruised iron, and static interfered with every channel except the private ghost line loop. At mile 173, I hit a dead zone. No signal, no backup. At mile 185, I saw it, a shape half buried in sand, jagged and rusted. The tailgate of an old military rover. Painted on its side, almost erased by time, was the last ghost call sign I remembered. Echo 17. B. The signal was real. I pressed forward. The outpost came into view just after dawn. What was left of it? Half-collapsed walls. One solar panel barely upright. And a small tent rigged against the wall, tarped down with paracord and sandbags. 2 figures emerged when they saw me. One was tall, hunched from years of hard survival. The other walked with a limp, his arm in a crude sling. Both had the same look in their eyes, the same look I'd seen in mine the day I left Echo Dust. Not fear. Determination. The taller one spoke first. His voice cracked, dry and unused. Told you they'd come. The second man smiled, sunburned, bleeding, exhausted. Took you long enough. I said nothing. Just stepped out of the truck and handed over 2 ration bars and a canteen. No ceremony. Just the mission. We didn't speak much on the way back. Didn't need to. The radio lit up with activity as soon as we hit comms range. Medical crews were waiting at the edge of the zone. Rodriguez circled overhead, broadcasting coordinates and wind patterns. Walker himself rode point in a rover to clear terrain. By the time we reached the safe line, every pilot, every medic, every quiet operator on the ghost line had shown up. No one asked why. They already knew. Dust doesn't abandon dust. We never found out exactly why they stayed behind at Kilo 5. Classified missions tend to stay that way, even when the soldiers don't. But it didn't matter. They were ours. And we brought them home. In the days that followed, something shifted. Not just within our unit, but across the chain. Walker received authorization to make the Ghost Line semi-official, an auxiliary humanitarian and extraction wing. Still off the books in most corners, still quiet, but now with recognition and access to military-grade logistics. We weren't ghosts anymore. We were guardians. The 2 rescued survivors, Lieutenant Marcus Dunn and Specialist Reva Cho, recovered quickly. Cho was barely 19 when she'd been deployed to Kilo 5. She'd aged a decade in those forgotten sands. Dunn, gray at the temples and sharp-eyed, asked to stay on and help us train. I let him. The compound where we'd patched tires and ration water now had its own grid connection, shaded med tents, and a landing strip for short-haul flights. June ran a workshop for drone training and mobile dispatches. Rodriguez coordinated weekly flyovers to support runs into the deeper corridors. And me? I just kept driving. Same pickup, same path, same grid. But now, I wasn't alone. One evening, just before sundown, Rodriguez handed me a small wooden box. Inside was a new patch. Not stitched, but burned into leather. Hand-cut. Hand-signed. It bore the Ghost Line insignia with a single addition. For those who still walk. I placed it beside the original Echo Dust skull on my dash. Didn't need to wear it. The desert knew. So did those who still flew above it, and the quiet hands who served without needing thanks. Every time I dropped off medicine to a tent city or pulled a bleeding contractor from a wreck, I saw it in their eyes, that strange blend of disbelief and relief. A woman alone, out here, doing what most said couldn't be done. Sometimes they asked why. I never gave them a speech. I just pointed to the faded patch, the one still hanging from my rear view. The desert remembers, I'd say. And so do we. Months passed. The mission stacked. Lives got saved. And then, one dawn, a child ran up to my truck at the El Centro checkpoint. Couldn't have been older than 8. His mother stood behind him, eyes glassy. He reached through the open window and pressed something into my hand. It was a crayon drawing of a truck in the desert, flanked by 2 flying shapes. At the top, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Thank you, Ghost Lady." I kept that one on the dash too, because that's how it works out here. You move quietly. You serve humbly. And if you're really lucky, someone might remember the shape you left in the sand. Not as a name, not as a rank, but as a promise that we walk for those who can't. And some ghosts never fade.